till now we have started setting up the relationship between movies and theaters, right? And things are going good so far. We were able to add movies to a corresponding theater. We were able to remove movies from a corresponding theaters, and so on and so forth. So things are going so far so good. There are few corner cases that maybe we can handle very quickly so that we don't land up at any kind of an issues. A very interesting thing that you will see is, let's say, let me show you the database. So let's refresh. Okay, so if you talk about this PVR, let's take this PVR's ID. Let's paste this ID here, and let's take a movie ID which is already present in the PVR, put it here, make insert as true, and send it. If you will refresh, you can see it actually added one ID twice, right? This ID that has been added is now added twice. This is something that we need to handle, right? We have to figure out a way in which we can handle this thing, because the problem is, if you will have multiple entries of a movie inside the array of movies inside the theater, then when you will populate what all movies are coming in the theater, that thing will actually get repeated, right? So let's say if you added one movie as, let's say, Spider-Man, one movie as, let's say, Avengers, and if you will make multiple entries of it, so in one theater only you will get multiple entries of the same movie, right? That this movie is available twice, and that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So we can maybe try to validate this thing, right? And one very easy way can be, when we are adding the movies, right? When we are adding the movies, then maybe we can handle this, right? This can be a good way in which we will be able to handle this. Okay, so what we can do is, we can try to form a set. We can try to form a set of the movie IDs. This movie IDs, if you will see, this is the movie IDs that has been provided to us. And this theater.movies is the array, which is the array containing the movies inside the theater. So what we can do is, let previous movies, we can create a set out of it. How can we create a set? We can say new set, and we can say theater.movies, right? So we have created this set now. Now what we are going to do is, before we actually push here, we are going to check that if previous movies dot has the current movie ID, if it is not having, if the set is not having the current movie ID, then only we will push it inside the theater movies, right? So this can be done. So let's do one thing. Let's first of all remove this movie from the corresponding theater. So we have technically removed it. Let's refresh. Okay, and let's try to remove it again. Okay, so we are having some problem, I guess. So let's see. So this is false, and let's try to update manually first of all. Okay, so we have removed all the movies array, right? Let's add up a movie. Let's add a movie, insert a movie, sorry, true, right? Send it. So we have successfully added a movie. You can see this movie was not present. If you will try to send it again, okay, so we are getting multiple entries for now. Okay, let's try once more. Okay, so we are still getting multiple entries. Let's see. Let's try to do console.log previous movies. Okay, let's see what is there, and let's open the terminal here. Let's send the request again. Okay, it's a set. Okay, it's a set of new object ID, right? And we are getting an entry of this. Okay, makes sense. So we need to handle it somehow, like in a separate way. So what I was thinking was, This theater.movies, I thought that it is a set of like an array of strings, but it's not an array of string. It's an array of object IDs. So we have to technically try to find object ID which is not having this movie ID, right? So we need to handle it like this. So let's just see how can we do it. Okay, so let's just see how can we do this. So we are going to make some changes to the code, right? In this update movies theater, right? What we are currently doing is we are trying to fetch a theater, and then we are checking if that theater is present or not, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all of this, right? The moment we remove all of this, we will start getting error here. So we'll handle it, no problem. For the timing, we'll say that if there's an insert call coming, then we have to insert the movies, right? So instead of putting a loop, so technically, generally, we say that putting a loop is not the best practice, and generally in databases, we have some mechanism that can help us to avoid the loops. In the loop, there are two problems. First of all, we are not even able to identify that whether an entry was already present or not, and it's a loop, right? We don't want to do that. So if you want to replace the same loop, this loop, if you like kind of like want to replace, we have a separate uh, function. What we can do is we can say theater dot find by id, or let's do one thing. Let me first of all show you one thing. Let's go to the older state of the code, and now we want to replace this, right? So what we can say is we'll say await. So currently we are fetching the theater. Let's first of all show you this, and we can say theater dot update. Okay, we want to update the theater, right? This theater that we have fetched by find by id. And how can we update it? We can say let's pass an object here. We'll say there is a function dollar push. Okay, this push function will insert a new entry. This is like doing the for loop and then doing theater dot movies dot push. And push function actually pushes one entry. If you want to push a whole array, then we will first of all put the property in which we want to push the things, and then we'll put in this property we'll put the value as an object. This object will be having key as each, and the value will be the array whose each entry we want to push in the movies array of the theater object, right? So let's save this and let's do one thing. Let's pick up this movie pvr, let's say pvr plaza. Let's update its entry, and let's have two movies. And if you send it, okay, so currently nothing is getting updated, right? Nothing is getting updated. So you can see it's saying collection dot update is deprecated. Use update one, update many, or bulk write. So let's replace update with update one. Okay, let's try update one. If you send it, still no change is happening because update is only deprecated. There is not much change that is going to happen. So this mechanism is not going to directly work. Instead, we have a different way to handle this. That's why I removed this theater object here, and instead we are going to use a different call. We are going to say await. It's a promise based function, and using the theater model, we'll say theater dot find by id and update, right? Or we can say update one. Let's use update one only. Update one. The first object is going to be the unique identifier using which we have to identify the theater, so that will be theater id. The second object is actually going to be the update mechanism, right? So how we are going to update, we are going to say dollar push, and then the value is again going to be an object whose key is going to be the parameter, which is an array movies. And again the value here, the value can be a movie id, but because we want to push a complete array, we are going to again put an object, put a dollar each, and then put movie IDs, right? This syntax we are going to use. So let's try this one now, right? Now due to this, what will happen is you are not able to access the theater object here. So let's comment this out, and we can say const theater is equals to await theater dot find by id theater ID, right? So that we can return it. Let's comment out all of this code as well, because this is also expected to be changed. And now let's retry. If you retry, now you can see the movies is getting populated, and both of the movies are getting populated, right? But if you see the problem, due to the previous calls, we already like updated the two movies already, so there can be repetition that is going to happen. So if I try to edit it and do it again, let's remove all of these movies, update it, and let's retry, send. Now we are just having two entries, but if you will send it again, we are going to have two more entries. So it is still going to repeat, because push is just like a normal push of an array. If you want to add the element such that if there is already an old element and it should not get repeated, instead of push, you need to use something like addToSet. So it is going to add the elements inside the array such that it is inserting in a set, right? It is going to assume array as a set, and it's only going to make unique entries. So now if you edit this, okay, we have edited. Let's send the request again, refresh. You can see we have two entries. Send it again, refresh, we still have two entries. So now we are actually adding as a set, right? So let me repeat the whole syntax. We are going to use the theater model dot update one. It is going to update one record. Which one record? You are going to pass the unique identifier using which you can identify that record. That is the underscore ID, and we are going to pass the theater ID. Then as a second parameter, we have to pass an object. This object takes a key value pair. The first key is going to be the operation that you have to do. So the operation can be push, similar to push. If you want to remove, that can be pull, something like this. So we are going to use adding, we are doing adding a set, add to set. Add to set operation, what it does is whatever array you will pass, it is actually going to consider that array as a set and then do an insertion as a set. So then we are going to pass another object whose key is going to be the array that you want to have. So like the movies array of the corresponding theater object. And inside that array, we want to not only insert one data, but we want to insert multiple data points. So if you want to insert a complete array inside this movies, you can do $each. So this is going to be the syntax, right? And if you have updated this, now you can see we are not putting any loop, and we are actually using the capability of Mongo only, right? Now if you want to, let's say, remove the elements, then also we don't need to like put a loop. We can again do something like await theater dot update one. First object is going to be the unique identifier, that is the theater ID. Second is going to be the operation. So now this time we want to do a pull. Okay, we want to do a pull. Pull from what parameter? Movies parameter. And we'll use the operator in, that is whatever is like whatever movie IDs we put, whatever movie IDs are present in the movies array of the corresponding theater, we are going to remove that. Okay, so now let's remove one movie and let's make insert as false. If you send it, refresh, and this theater is what? Beware Plaza, right? If you go here, you can see only one entry is there. If instead of that entry, if you remove this entry, so both of the entries should go now. This should be false. Okay, currently we only have one entry. If you send it again, now you can see movies array is empty. You can even refresh and you can check the movies array is empty, right? If you want to insert it again, insert both of them gets inserted. So from here also we are escaping out of the loop, right? That is something very good. And we can remove this, right? Now there can be a case that we don't find anything, we don't find a corresponding theater. For example, let's say instead of D9 we do D8 and send it. You can see it is giving us 500 internal server error. Why? Because the error you are getting is let's see, we are actually getting the error here. Let's do this, let's comment both of them out and send the request again, right? So we are printing these cannot read properties of undefined right? So theater controller, we are catching this error in theater controller, right? So now what we can do is we can do a try catch here. We can put a try catch here, error. We can do console.log error, and we can do throw error, and all of this logic we can put inside try. Okay, let's now see what happens if we put a wrong ID. Okay, send. Now we should have printed it. So it says, I guess we are printing in the controller as well. Let's not do that. Let's not do printing here. Send it again. And now it says cannot read properties of null, reading populate, right? So this populate line is giving us an error, right? So let's do this. Let's send the request again. Okay, no error caught here. And let's see how we getting this 500 internal server error. We are throwing an error, and in the controller we are getting the error. So if you print the error here as well. Okay, so now it's getting error again. So the error is cannot read properties of null, reading err. Okay, so this error is null. Okay, wait, let's see what can be done here. So we want to keep a check that this theater ID should be present, right? This update one is not making anything bizarre. This should be present always, right? So if we try to catch it, let's see. Error is, it's a type error, cannot read null, right? So we can say if error dot name is equals to type error. I guess that's the name, right? Type error. Right. So we can say return an error object with a code 404 and mess error as no theater found for the given ID. Okay, this should be the case. Otherwise, we will throw the error. So now let's send it again. And now you can see we are getting 404 not found, right? That no theater found for the given request. And that's it. I believe this should work fine for us. And let's try with some other theater. Let's take this PVR select city walk, send it, and we are able to insert all the movies and things are working absolutely fine. So we have even improved our use case. So let's just try to quickly commit this. Let's say it's a fix, remove loops for adding or removing movies. And we have pushed it. So all we did was we just used the MongoDB operators, that is addToSet and pull. You can even use push and pull, but push is not going to make sure that you are always inserting unique values. So all of these addToSet, push, pull, in, each, these are MongoDB operators, and you can even use this in Mongoose, right? So that's the power of ODM, right? In ODM, you can not only use ODM specific features, but you can even use the raw features of the database. All we did was, if there is an insert parameter coming, we are going to use update one to actually add to set. Otherwise, we are going to use update one to actually pull, that is remove from the set. To add to set all the values of a given array, we are going to use this each operator. And to remove all the values which are present in the given array, we are going to use in operator. And then we are just going to find the theater, and that's it, right? So what we can do, we can even avoid this call, I believe. Let's see if we can do let theater. right? And if we comment this out, and if we do theater is equals to this, and theater is equals to this, and let's put one more property, new as true. Okay, you already know about new as new true, right? That these update functions return old object, we want the new updated object, so we can return new true. And technically this should also work, right? Let's try with some other uh, inox leisure. Let's try with this. We try to insert, send. Okay, it says something went wrong. Let's see what went wrong. It is saying 404 not found. uh, let's see why. So we have an issue here. I don't think this syntax is working. New true. Technically it should. Technically it should. Uh, let's do one thing. Let's say return this directly. Let's see if we directly return it, then what happens. Okay, we okay, so I guess update one is not returning properly. So if we do find by id and update, let's see if this works. Yes, so for update one actually doesn't return the actual theater object. You have to replace it with find by id and update, and then you can even save this call, right? So if you will refresh and check inox leisure, you can see it is here. Let's try for pvr aura as well. Send it again, and you can see we are able to insert movies. Previously there were no movies. If now you refresh, there are now movies, right? And if you send it again, movies are not getting repeated. See, refresh, movies are not getting repeated. So we even saved this extra theater call, that is also now getting saved. So update one doesn't actually return you the updated object, find by id does. And you have to pass this another object new true, that will help you to actually get the new updated object instead of the old object. So let's even commit this as a fix. So git add all, git commit -m, saved one more call, one more db call by returning updated object while updating. And that's it. So I hope the overall logic on how to update things in a much more cleaner fashion, and I would say much more MongoDB way, is clear to everyone. Another syntax might look a bit overwhelming in the first glance, because there are a lot of objects inside objects inside objects, right? But slowly and steadily you will realize that we just have to pass parameters. One parameter is just to uniquely identify the object, one parameter is just to put the operation in which you put the property in which you want to do the operation, and then the third object will put the operation on the input, right? That is each on the input, and that's it. Otherwise rest of things are just try catch and nothing more. So we have successfully implemented our I would say addition of movies inside the theater, as well as removal of movies inside the theaters. In the upcoming set of parts, we are going to continue our discussion and extend our functionalities beyond just adding or removing the movies to actually fetching the movies from these theaters. So let's just stay tuned for that. We have already set up our functionality to actually update movies in the theaters, right? So now we want to build a new functionality. Let's just talk about that. So now what we want to do is we want to get the list of all theaters in which a movie is running. Right. I've already shown you the platforms like Book My Show, Paytm Movies, Fandango, etc. When you specifically click on a movie poster, then all the theaters that are there for a particular movie gets listed out, right? So we have to figure out that. We have to figure out that somehow. So we can say that we will write a new API, a new API to get the list of all theaters, to get the list of all theaters in which a given movie is running, right? This API we want to write. As a response, we want to return, as a response, we want to return the list of theaters which are running the movie. Right. This is something that we want to do. So, first of all, let's just try to look at the API signature, how the API will look like. So what we are going to say is that the type of the request is going to be a get request, because somehow we like want to like fetch the data. We are not going to make a lot of change or something. And then we are going to say the route of the request will be something like slash MBA slash API slash V1 slash theaters. Why we are putting it in theaters? Because technically we want to filter out the theaters, right? That's why we are doing this. And then we will put a query param, because we want all theaters based on a particular filter, and the filter is this movie. We will say movie ID is equals to some movie ID, right? And technically when we put a movie, then we just don't want movie which is like running in all over the world, right? We just don't want that. We will be putting kind of like a pin code as well, or maybe a city, right? So we can have more parameters here of pin code, city as well. So we need to inculcate that. We have to make sure that we do that as well. But for the timing, let's stick to movie ID. Let's stick to movie ID. In the request object, we are going to get nothing because we don't want any request body, because every filter parameter is going to be there in the query param. As a response, what we are going to do, we are going to build a success parameter. This is going to tell us whether the API was successful or not in its overall operation. We are going to have an error parameter. This error parameter will be an empty object if there was no error. If there was some error, then it will be having that error detail. There will be a data parameter which will be empty if there was some error and we were not able to fulfill the request. Otherwise, this data parameter is going to have the corresponding data that is expected to be returned to the API, and then a message format. Right, based on the error, or let's say if our API is successful, this message is going to get modified. So kind of like this response is going to this is going to be the API signature that we have to follow. Now let's just see that how can we implement this API, because implementation of this API is going to be super cool, and we are going to see a new kind of a query as well. So this is going to be interesting. So without any further delay, let's just start. Okay, so now we already like saw what is the signature expected for the API, right? Now we have to implement this API, right? And according to the signature, if you will go to theaterroutes.js, then we have something like slash MBA slash API slash U1 slash theaters, right? Our agenda is also to like get all the theaters in which a particular movie is running, right? So technically this API is already there, which we were using to either fetch all the theaters or either to filter theaters based on city, pin code, etc. Right? If you go to the corresponding controller, then this was the controller that we were using. We were getting all the filter parameters inside the query params, right? You can see from this controller, this theater controller.js, we have this method get theaters, and we are actually calling theater service get all theaters, and we are passing the query object. Now we are coming to the service file, and then using the query object passed here in the data parameter, we are actually building the query that if there is city present, then we are putting city and the city value, pin code value, and so on and so forth. And then at last we are trying to make theater.find, and we are trying to put the query here. This query is the filter parameter, and these are the fields that you want to fetch. And if let's say if you want to put the pagination parameter, then we are doing this thing, right? Okay. Now what we can do is in this theater.find, we can actually update this query parameter such that this query parameter tries to fetch our movie, right? So technically, when this route will be hit, we will be sending a query param. That query param can contain city, pin code, and other parameters along with the corresponding movie ID, right? This is going to be interesting. So we don't have to make any changes to the route file. That's going to be same as it is. We don't have to actually make any changes to the controller. That is going to be same as it is. We can just come to the service and then make our change. So in this data parameter, we have actually sent our query params from the controller, right? So what we can do is we can now have another check. We'll say that if data parameter is there, it's not a falsy value, and then we have data dot movie ID, right? If we have the movie ID parameter, then we can do something. Let's put it above pagination, right? Okay. So what we have to do is we are going to actually, based on this movie ID, we are going to actually try to fetch a movie, right? So we can say that let movie is equals to await movie dot find by ID data dot movie ID. Now you might be thinking why we are actually like having the movie object. So we need to technically get the movie model as well. So we'll say const movie is equals to require. We can get the movie model. So we'll go to model slash movie dot model. So actually, in order to filter our theater based on this movie ID, the corresponding movie ID that we have sent, we know that in the schema, in the database, if you see that inside the theaters we have this movies array, which is actually going to store the object ID, right? This object ID is not a normal string; it's going to be mapped to an object, right? So in order to filter all the theaters in which a particular movie is running, we cannot just send an ID. We have to actually get a whole movie object, right? And then use it to filter it out, like filter out all the theaters. Otherwise we have to go to all the theaters manually and then put a loop and then do things, right? That's going to be quite painful and it's going to take a lot of time, right? So first of all, we are going to get this movie object. Once we have this movie object, then we are going to inside our query parameter, we are going to put a parameter movies, right? Which is going to be equal to a new object, and in that object we are going to put $all, right? $all is like Mongo's like you can say MongoDB's operator that we are using in Mongoose, right? And then we can pass this movie object, right? We can do this, and I believe this should help us, right? This should help us. So technically, if you see here the query object will look something like maybe it has some pin code 110031, right? And then it will be having this movies parameter, which will be actually something like $all, and then inside that it will be having a movie object. Something like this will be there, right? And all we have to do is just do theater.find, and I believe this should work, right? So let's try. Let's see. So we want to fetch all the theaters in which a particular movie is running. So let's see. Let's take this movie ID and let's open Postman. Let's check if the server is running. Yes, server is running. So now what we have to do, we have to make a GET request to /mba/api/v1/theaters, and we have to put a query param. Query param is going to be a movie ID, and we are going to pass the movie ID, right? You can see we have data.movie ID, right? Okay, cool. So now what we can do is we can send this request and see what happens. And now you can see we are getting this data. In the data, we are getting PVR Logics Noida, PVR Plaza, PVR Select City Walk. So we are getting 3 theaters in which this movie with last F1 character movie ID is there. So let's verify in the database. So this is not having the movie. This is also not having the movie. This is having the movie, that is PVR Logics Noida, and we are getting PVR Logics Noida, so that's correct. Then apart from that, PVR Plaza is there, so we are even getting PVR Plaza, that is also correct, right? And let's say we have PVR Select City Walk also, so PVR Select City Walk is also there, so that also works, right? So you can see using this simple object we are able to do it, and rest of the movie arrays are empty. And the thing is, like, we were already having this API, right, in using which we were able to filter theaters. So we can go forward with our previous city filter. For example, in these 3 parameters, we just want the theaters which are in New Delhi. We don't want this one from Noida. So if you send the request, now you can see we are just having 2 entries for the city New Delhi. Even now, if you will change the pin code, you will only get 1 entry, that is PVR Plaza. So our older filters were already working, and now we have just very easily fetched our movies also, that what all theaters are there which are having a particular movie ID. So technically speaking, if I write about it, all we had to do was we just check that whether we have a movie parameter or not, movie ID parameter or not. Then we fetch the movie object. We fetch the movie object, and then in inside our query object that we were building, that we actually passed here, we put a parameter movies, which is going to be equal to another object. Inside this object, the key is going to be the operator, and the value is going to be the value for which we have to filter. The operator is all. So what it does is, in the theaters, it's going to check in all the theaters whether you have a movie with this object ID or not. Now you might be thinking, is it necessary to always keep this movie object only? So you can even give a try with data.movie ID. Let's try now. So if you now send the request, you can see we are getting all of the parameters, right? And let's filter this city. So even we are getting without the movie object, so that is even better. So we don't have to fetch the movie object, so that's good. Let's check for one more movie. Let's cross verify. So we don't need to actually, I guess, give the movie object, just the ID is sufficient as a string. So now we should get one more data pointer. Let's remove city. Yes, so we are getting Luke Cinema as well. Okay, cool. So we don't need to get the movie object, so this is even better. So let's even avoid it, right? So this query is capable for even directly searching with a movie ID string. So this is even more efficient, right? And if you want to see like what underlying I would say queries it is actually running, then we have a debug property with Mongoose. So let me show you that. You can just enable it so that you can see what underlying queries do we have. Mongoose debug, right? So you can see that you can just set Mongoose set debug property to true, and what will happen is if you will go to index.js and let's say you do mongoose.set debug true, and now you make a request. Now you will also get what actually the query was. So the query was theaters.find movies all, and inside the array you are having this object id. It already like automatically converted this to an object id, so that's even better, right? So we don't need to fetch with a movie object, otherwise it will be two queries, and we can save that. So let's just quickly check. All we did was we went to the service, we had a data movie id, and then we made a query object. Inside the query object we had a parameter movies as a key, and the value is again an object. Inside that object we are having our operator all, which is going to actually search uh, in all the theaters if there is any movie movies array having this particular movie id as an object id, and then we put that object id, and that's it. If we are not going to do that, then we have to manually do it, and that can be problematic. So we are done with this, and in order to get the logs, we just did mongoose.set debug true, and that's it, right? So you can read about the all operator in MongoDB, right? You can open the MongoDB manual, and if you see, the all operator selects the documents where the value of a field is an array. So this is specifically for an array that contains all the specified elements. To specify an all expression, use the following prototype. So it's going to actually check, like you can pass a bunch of parameters. We are just passing one movie id, but you can pass like an array also, and it is going to check for all the arrays whether they have this or not. It's kind of like contains, right? So it's going to check in all the records whether we have these particular values in their array field or not. So the field on which we have to put this query should be an array. So this is something really interesting, right? So we are done with this part, right? What we can do, we can just quickly commit this. Added API for getting all the theaters which are running a particular movie, right? And we can just quickly push this, right? So we have successfully implemented this API, and to be very honest, there was not much effort because API was already there, the route was already there, the controller was already there, so we didn't had to do much. There can be one use case that you can do. You can try to have a movie ID that is not present. Let's even check that case. This movie ID is not present. If you send it, you can see we are getting an empty data object, so no movie is present for this ID. So this is also getting handled quite easily, right? So I believe this part is clear to everyone, that how can we filter things based on movies. We have done a lot of work. We were able to set up the movies resource, we were able to set up the theater resource as well, and in past few parts we have associated kind of like theaters with the movies. Using different capabilities around MongoDB, we were able to very efficiently query movies, insert movies, remove movies from a theaters, and much more, right? So now technically we want to explore one more feature of these movie booking applications. So let me show you that. So if you go to book my show, and if you open it, so let's say you can go to movies, right? And technically, not only for movies, but you can even search for a particular cinema, right? You can search for a particular theater, that what all movies are running there in a particular theater. For example, um, let's go to PVR Phoenix Market City. Okay, so here on Saturday 3rd of September we have three movies running. We have Spider-Man, Top Gun Maverick, Beast, right? So these three movies are running in PVR 4DX Phoenix Market City Mall. So technically what we are actually doing is, on a particular date, and like all we did was just click on this, right? We can just go here again, click on cinemas, and when the moment you click it, you can see the URL, right? It actually redirected you to PVR 4DX Phoenix Market City Mall, Whitefield Road / Cinema Bank PDS this and some ID. So what technically it is doing is, uh, this is the date parameter. If you go behind, you can see the date is changing, and then this is the parameter of the name of the theater, right? So based on theater, we are able to list that on a particular date what all movies are running, right? Currently we don't have any logic around dates, that how to associate dates in our application. Let's keep that aside for some time being. And first of all, we need to have a functionality that when we try to access a theater, then we should be able to get all the movies running in that theater. This is something really very important, right? So how can we do that? We are going to write an API for that, and it's going to be quite easy because MongoDB is going to give us quite some functionalities, and because we are already using Mongos, those functionalities are really very accessible. So let's just see. So technically, we should have an API which should be having a route like this. So we want to get all the movies running in a theater. So we can say slash API slash, sorry, we should have something like slash MBA slash API slash V1 slash theaters, right? And then we should have the theater ID, right? We should have this theater ID that is going to uniquely identify the theaters slash movies, right? Slash movies. So what we are going to do, this says that this API will try to fetch all the movies running in the theater with the given ID. With the given ID, right? So for this given ID, this is going to be the theater ID. We are going to find all the theaters, right? We are going to find the corresponding theater because every theater has its own unique ID. So there will be only one entry of the theater with the corresponding ID. And we are going to get all the movies from that theater. This is going to be interesting, right? So what we can do is, this is going to be the route. And if you talk about the type of the request, then the type of the request should be, of course, get, because we want to actually fetch data. We are not going to make any changes in the resource on the backend. Then the request object is going to be empty because we don't want to send anything in the request object. If we talk about the response object, then we should have a success parameter that is going to define whether the API was, like, we were able to hit the API successfully or not. There will be an error parameter that will be an empty object if there was no error and API was successful. Otherwise, this error parameter will be having the details of the error. Then we'll be having a data parameter, which will be empty if there was some error, the API was not successful. Otherwise, this data parameter is going to have the corresponding data that we want to return. And then there will be some custom messaging, right? There will be some custom messaging. So this is going to be the signature of the API, and this is what we want to do, right? Now, how can we do this? How to get all the movies of a particular theater? So Mongoose helps us with something like populate, right? We have already seen the power of populate. So populate technically works like a join only in the world of MongoDB. So if, let's say, we want to fetch all the movies, like if you just do theater.find, let's say we just do theater.find, then in the response object, we are just going to get an array of movie IDs, right? We're not going to get the whole movie object. That's problematic, right? So if we want to get all the whole movie object, right, instead of just the ID inside the array, we want to get the all movie object, we have to use populate. Now we don't want to get all the details of the theater like ID and all. We just want to, let's say, have name of the theater and address of the theater, and let's say all the movies that are running at that theater. This is the only information that we have to do. So in this find parameter, we can also pass fields, that what actual fields we want to fetch, right? So let me show you the MongoDB docs. So I believe we can search for populate. Hey, oh, sorry, populate should be present in Mongoose. Populate is a property from Mongoose. Okay, so you can see MongoDB has join like lookup aggregation and has a more powerful alternative like populate. So all you have to do is whenever you are querying, you have to just use populate. You can see for the story we are trying to populate the author object. This is going to be interesting. And you can see this part. This is the filter parameter in the find function. The first parameter is actually the filter, that is what properties based on which you want to do the filter. The second parameter you can put here only. You can second parameter you can put an object which can act like fields, right? That what all fields you want to fetch. So I can even search for that, I believe. So you can see that fields in Mongoose query. Okay, select a specific field with find. So here you can see that you can use this select, right? You can use select, right? Here also you can see this is select, and you can even pass this name like this here, right? So there are multiple ways you can use this, then created at, updated at, and things like these. So 0 is the parameter that we say for ignore, 1 means to show. So we can just put those parameters that we want to show, right? So let's try this. Let's start building the API so that we can get some more context. So first thing is we can go to the service and we can say const get movies in a theater, right? We are going to pass the theater ID. We'll bind it inside a bunch of try catch, and we are going to say const theater is equals to await theater dot find by ID, right? You can see the first parameter is the ID parameter, right? So you can say just pass the ID, and then the second is the query options, right? So I believe we can pass something like name, and then we can pass something like movies, right? Let's keep it like this and let's see what comes up. Then we'll return theater, else catch. We'll catch the error here and we'll throw the error. Console.log error. Okay, so this is going to be like this. So we already had one API where we were just getting the details of the theater, like get theater, right? This is going to return everything about the theater. So we can have a check that if we are not able to find the theater, like no theater is present, then we should return an error object which will be having error parameter which will say no theater with the given ID found, and this should be a 404. Okay, cool. And now what we can do is we can go and just export this. Now we can go to the controller and we can write a new function, const get movies, and we are going to get the HTTP request object, HTTP response object. We are going to bind it inside a bunch of try catch, and here what we are going to say is error response body dot error is equals to this error parameter, and we are going to say return res dot status 500 dot json error response body. Okay, and now we can try to call the service. So we'll say const response is equals to await theater service dot get movies in a theater, and we are going to pass request dot params dot id. and we'll say that if response parameter is having an error parameter, then we are going to say error response body dot error is equals to response dot error, and we are going to return rest dot status response dot code dot json error response body. Otherwise, we are going to build up the success response body dot data is equals to response, and success response body dot message is equals to successfully fetched the data, the movies for the theater, and we can say return rest dot status 200, that is 200 okay dot json success response body, right? This is going to be our typical controller, and we are going to export get movies, right? And inside our theater route, we are going to add one more route, app.get. The route will look like /mba /api /v1 /theaters /:id. That is going to be theater ID, and in this theater we are going to get all the movies, and this is going to be mapped to theater controller dot get movies, right? This is going to be interesting. So what we can do is, let's remove this, we don't want movie ID. Let's get a theater from the database. So let's select City Walk as the ID. We can do /this/movies, and if you try to send the request, okay, so it's returning you name and it's returning you movies, and that's what we did, right? If you go to the service, what we did theater.find by ID, we passed the ID, and we tried to just fetch the name and movies. So just name and movies is coming, nothing else. If you just remove this object and then send the request, you can see description, city, pin code, everything is coming. We don't want that much data. Let's say we want name, movies, and we want address as well. Okay. Now the thing is, if you still send the request, you are just getting movie IDs. You are not getting the whole movie object. Like we can't see any detail about the movies. So what we can do is we can say populate, and we can say movies. Okay, we'll try to populate movies, and if you send this request, now you can see in the movies array, instead of just getting the ID, we are getting the complete movie object, right? We're getting complete movie object. So this is interesting. So we are getting all the details about the movie directly here, right? So technically our API is working. If you try to pass a theater which is not present, we are getting 404 not found, no theater found with the given ID, right? And things are working fine. So let's just quickly commit this. Added API for getting all the movies running in a theater. Git push, and done. So we have successfully implemented the API using which we can fetch all the movies that are currently running or going on in a theater. And this is kind of like a win-win situation for us, right? Because we are able to structure our movie booking application much better now when compared to the previous implementation. So we are going to talk about the agenda that we are going to follow for some further upcoming set of parts, right? Now our agenda is, now after the setup, of theater and movie resource, we want to start setting up authentication, authentication and authorization, right? So we are already done with the earlier part, right? And now we want to set up authentication and authorization. So technically we will first of all list down the agenda, and then we are going to actually start doing the coding stuff and understanding the things. So the further upcoming agenda is going to be to first of all understand authentication and authorization. We'll try to understand the terminologies, the nuances of authentication, how it works, different type of authentication we are going to discuss, right? Then we will try to specifically focus on token based authentication, right? We are going to specifically focus on token based authentication, and we are even going to do the whatever coding implementation we'll do, that will be also based on token based authentication only. After that, we are going to actually start the coding part. We are going to set up model for the user DB, user collection, right? We are going to set up that a user collection, because whenever somebody wants to register to our application or maybe authenticate to our application, anything that they want to do, they will, the data for them will be stored inside kind of like a user model only, right? And the thing is, this collection that we are going to build is going to be really very important for authorization also, because we are going to store the role of the user also in the user collection. So this model setup is going to be very important. But first of all, we are going to focus things around authentication, then we will move to authorization. Then we are going to write APIs for user registration, right? So we are going to set up the whole mechanism from services, controllers, routes, and everything, so that a new user is able to register to our application, right? This is mainly for new users, new users, okay? And then what we can do is, after the registration, we are going to set up APIs for user login. That is, a new user should be able to log into our application. This is something really very important, because the login mechanism only is going to help us to actually authenticate the users. So we are going to first of all set up a basic login mechanism. But once this basic mechanism is done, we are going to jump forward to modify the login API, modify the login API to token based auth. Right, then we are going to modify it to token based auth, because initially we are going to have just a basic API, then we are going to later modify it to a token based authentication. Once we have token based authentication with us, right, we are also going to make sure that secure storage of passwords, right? We are going to make sure that whatever passwords we are storing in our database, all those passwords are secure, right? They are hashed in a particular form. We are not storing plain password of any users, because that can be problematic for our application, because the user data and things will be out. That is something that we don't want. We are going to write APIs for password reset, because this is also a functionality that comes with us. So we should be able to reset our password. Once all of these APIs are done, then we are going to move to authorization. Right. And we will do registration and setup of admin and client. Right. So we are going to introduce roles around admins, roles around clients and everything. This is going to be really very important, right? So this is kind of like going to be the agenda for the upcoming set of parts, right? We'll talk about what type of APIs we have to build in-depth fashion. But the overall agenda around security is going to be this. We will spend good amount of time in actually understanding authentication, what is authentication, different type of authentication, and then we will spend even more time in actually implementing that, because that's going to be something that is going to actually give you all the knowledge that is going to be required in order to implement this. Authentication is something that is even asked a lot of times when somebody takes your interviews, and also having idea around how authentication works is definitely useful, right? And to be very honest, it's very easy. All you have to do is just understand the flow, that how the call flows work, and everything is going to be cakewalk. So I hope the overall agenda for the further upcoming set of parts is clear to everyone. Let's just first of all try to understand what is authentication and authorization, because in the further upcoming set of parts, this is going to be our main focus. So it becomes really very important in order to understand these two, I would say, terminologies and the nuances around it, right? So if you talk about some few major pointers, then both authentication, both authentication and authorization, both authentication and authorization are often used in conjunction with each other in terms of security, right? So both of these terms are related to security, and like a lot of time people use both of them simultaneously, one for another, right? But they have different meanings, but the context is always regarding security. That is something that you should understand, that both authentication and authorization is done for enhancing the security of your application, right? So the thing is, both terms are very different, very different. Both terms are very different with totally different concepts, right? Totally different concepts, right? If you talk about the big difference, then the big difference, the big difference between gaining successful entrance to a place and what you are allowed, what you are allowed to do inside, can help you, can help you to understand the difference, right? So the, like, whenever you go to a place, you are being allowed to enter the place is a different thing, but once you enter the place, what all things you can do there is a different thing. For example, a lot of time when you go to a museum, in order to go to the museum you have to buy a ticket, but after buying the ticket you cannot just like go and do anything, like move things here and there or touch anything, or like sometimes taking photographs is also prohibited. So what you can do inside is a separate concept. So the difference between these two things is similar to the difference between authentication and authorization, right? Okay, so let's talk about first of all authentication. We'll try to understand authentication so that once and for all it is clear to us. Okay, so it is the process of it is the process of verifying the identity it is the process of verifying the identity of a user of a user by obtaining their credentials, right, and use those to verify the user's identity, right? So technically authentication is going to be a process in which we are going to get credentials from the user, and we are going to verify that the credentials is of a valid user or not, that is a registered user or a user to which our platform is already familiar about because their data is saved in our database and multiple things. So this is what authentication is, right? Authentication always comes before authorization, right? That means in order to authorize a user a particular action, we need to first of all make them authenticate to the app. That means we need to identify or verify their identity so that they are a registered user or not, right? So whenever you do login into any application like Instagram, Facebook, Gmail, etc., everywhere you put your email ID or let's say your phone number and different thing based on, like we'll talk about all the different authentication systems, but you always try to put let's say for example in a basic authentication you try to put your email ID and password. So the backend system of the application verifies that email ID and password, and then only it allows you to use the app, like whatever roles have been given to you, you'll be able to roll that, right? So this is what authentication is, right? we are already we are already familiar with, right? We are already familiar, let's not write it twice. We are already familiar with process of authentication process of authentication because most of us perform it every day. So every day we log in, log out to different websites, apps, and everything. So this already gives us a taste about authentication, that what is authentication and what to expect. Like your credentials are getting validated, then only you are able to go inside the app. If it is not valid, then it doesn't allow you, so on and so forth. So this thing is something that we are already familiar with, right? Most of the things on internet becomes accessible after authenticating to the app authenticating to the app, right? So once you authenticate to the app, then only you are allowed to use the features. That is something that is present nowadays, right? However however, once you authenticate, once you authenticate, there are many decisions that happen simultaneously, and seamlessly in the background. In the background, thanks to secret power of an admin, right? So although we are able to authenticate and we use a lot of features from our application, but behind the scenes a lot of things are done by the administrator, like what actions you are allowed to see, what actions you are not allowed to see. All of these things are handled by the admin, right? And we can say that authentication factors determine the various elements so authentication factor determine the various elements the system used to verify one's identity prior to granting him access, right? So what we can say is that the whatever factors we use for authentication, right, these helps us to determine various element of our system, right, that is used to verify one's identity before we actually give them access to uh, do any kind of let's say transaction booking or anything, right? So what we can say is that a user's identity can be determined by what he or she knows, what he or she knows, what he or she has, or what he or she is, right? So generally if we want to identify the identity of a user, this can be determined by what they can do, what they are actually doing, right, what they already know, what kind of data they already know, and so on and so forth, right? So this is how authentication works. It is just to verify the incoming user. So if in short for terms I want to explain you guys, so whenever somebody wants to step into our application, use some feature, they have to go through a layer of authentication. In the layer of authentication, what happens is they give their credentials and we verify their credentials, that whether they are a registered user or not. If they are registered users, we would make them go through, otherwise not. Right, so this is the kind of definition you must know and you must always remember when you are like actually dealing with something complex like authentication. That being said, let's just wrap this video here. From let's just first of all try to understand what is authentication and authorization, because in the further upcoming set of parts this is going to be our main focus. So it becomes really very important in order to understand these two I would say terminologies and the nuances around it, right? So if you talk about some few major pointers, then both authentication authentication and authorization both authentication and authorization are often used in conjunction with each other in terms of security, right? So both of these terms are related to security, and like a lot of time people use both of them simultaneously, one for another, right? But they have different meanings, but the context is always regarding security. That is something that you should understand, that both authentication and authorization is done for enhancing the security of your application, right? So the thing is, both terms are very different, very different. Both terms are very different with totally different concepts, right? Totally different concepts, right? If you talk about the big difference, then the big difference the big difference between gaining successful entrance to a place and what you are allowed what you are allowed to do inside can help you can help you to understand the difference, right? So the like whenever you go to a place, you are being allowed to enter the place is a different thing, but once you enter the place, what all things you can do there is a different thing. For example, a lot of time when you go to a museum, in order to go to the museum you have to buy a ticket, but after buying the ticket you cannot just like go and do anything like move things here and there or touch anything, or like sometimes taking photographs is also prohibited. So what you can do inside is a separate concept. So the difference between these two things is similar to the difference between authentication and authorization, right? Okay, so let's talk about first of all authentication. We'll try to understand authentication so that once and for all it is clear to us. Okay, so it is the process of verifying the identity it is the process of verifying the identity of a user of a user by obtaining their credentials, right, and use those to verify the user's identity, right? So technically authentication is going to be a process in which we are going to get credentials from the user, and we are going to verify that the credentials is of a valid user or not, that is a registered user or a user to which our platform is already familiar about because their data is saved in our database and multiple things. So this is what authentication is, right? authentication always comes before authorization, right? That means in order to authorize a user a particular action, we need to first of all make them authenticate to the app. That means we need to identify or verify their identity so that they are a registered user or not, right? So whenever you do login into any application like Instagram, Facebook, Gmail, etc., everywhere you put your email ID or let's say your phone number and different thing based on, like we'll talk about all the different authentication systems, but you always try to put let's say for example in a basic authentication you try to put your email ID and password. So the backend system of the application verifies that email ID and password, and then only it allows you to use the app, like whatever roles have been given to you, you'll be able to roll that, right? So this is what authentication is, right? We are already we are already familiar with, right? We are already familiar, let's not write it twice. We are already familiar with process of authentication process of authentication because most of us perform it every day. So every day we log in, log out to different websites, apps, and everything. So this already gives us a taste about authentication, that what is authentication and what to expect. Like your credentials are getting validated, then only you are able to go inside the app. If it is not valid, then it doesn't allow you, so on and so forth. So this thing is something that we are already familiar with, right? Most of the things on internet becomes accessible after authenticating to the app authenticating to the app, right? So once you authenticate to the app, then only you are allowed to use the features. That is something that is present nowadays, right? However however, once you authenticate, once you authenticate there are many decisions there are many decisions that happen simultaneously that happen simultaneously and seamlessly in the background, thanks to secret power of an admin, right? So although we are able to authenticate and we use a lot of features from our application, but behind the scenes a lot of things are done by the administrator, like what actions you are allowed to see, what actions you are not allowed to see. All of these things are handled by the admin, right? And we can say that authentication factors determine the various elements So authentication factor determine the various elements the system used to verify one's identity prior to prior to granting him access. Right. So what we can say is that the whatever factors we use for authentication, right, these helps us to determine various element of our system, right, that is used to verify one's identity before we actually give them access to uh, do any kind of let's say transaction booking or anything, right. So what we can say is that a user's identity a user's identity can be determined by what he or she knows, what he or she knows, what he or she has, or what he or she is, right. So generally if we want to identify the identity of a user, this can be determined by what they can do, what they are actually doing, right, what they already know, what kind of data they already know, and so on and so forth, right. So this is how authentication works. It is just to verify the incoming user. So if in short terms I want to explain you guys, so whenever somebody wants to step into our application, use some feature, they have to go through a layer of authentication. In the layer of authentication, what happens is they give their credentials and we verify their credentials, that whether they are a registered user or not. If they are registered users, we would make them go through, otherwise not. Right. So this is the kind of definition you must know and you should must always remember when you are like actually dealing with something complex like authentication. Till now, we have done quite a stuff. In the previous few parts, we were able to associate movies with the theaters, right? And we were able to associate both the models, that is the theater resource model and movie resource model, both of them together. We wrote a lot of APIs. If you technically see, um, let's go to GitHub. Let's open GitHub here. Right. In order to discuss all the features that we have written by now, you can see this. So you can just open movie booking API node, this URL, and you can go to feature 3 and you'll be able to get all the features that we have written, right. So you can go to commits and all of the commits are here, like added API for getting movies running in a theater, added API for getting all the theaters which are running a movie, right. So things like this. So we made some fixes as well, right, and multiple things we have done, and we made quite some progress, right. In this part we are going to do one more thing. We are going to write one more API so that we can check whether a movie is present in a theater or not. Just this simple. And we are going to do some cleanup regarding the response codes, because currently the response code that we are having is kind of like hard coded, like 200, 500, this kind of. What we are going to do, we are going to have a dedicated response code, I would say strings, and that we can feed there. That will be really helpful. So this kind of a cleanup is going to help us. So without any further delay, let's just start. So if we talk about the API signature, let's open it here. Okay. Now, what we can write as the API signature is, let's first of all talk about the route, how the route is going to look like. So route will be something like slash MBA because it's for movie booking application, slash API because it's an API based route, slash V1 because it's the version 1 of our API, and slash theaters slash colon theater ID right? That is for a particular theater. We want to check whether a particular movie is there or not, and then we can do slash movies slash movie ID, right? This can be the case. So you can see now we are not just putting colon ID because we have to access two IDs. We won't be able to directly decipher it based on ID. We need to have two variable values. So one variable value we are keeping as theater ID. This is going to denote the unique theater ID. And for that particular theater for which we have the unique theater ID, we are going to check whether a particular movie is present or not, right? This is going to be simple. So this is going to be the route. This is going to be the route. And if you talk about the type of the request is going to be get, right? Because we just want to fetch this information, nothing change in the resource side on the backend. The request body is going to be empty because we don't want to send anything in the request body. Things should be fine even without it. And if you talk about response body, in the response body we are going to have a success parameter, right? This success parameter is actually going to denote whether the API was successful or not, whether we were able to successfully hit the API or not. Then we'll be having an error parameter that is going to be an empty object if during the API call like there was no error, but if there was some error then this error object will be non-empty. There will be one data object. In this data object we are going to have the actual data that is going to be returned from the API, right? This data object is going to be empty if there was no such I would say processing completed. And we are going to have a message parameter that is going to help us to figure out custom messaging based on different situations that happened to our code based on different error types. So this can be a simple API to write. Okay, cool. So now what we have to do, we have to check whether the corresponding movie is there in a theater or not. So we'll first of all come to service, right? Now we already have a function where we are checking this that we are trying to get all the movies in a theater. This function we already have, and if you will carefully see, we also have a function where we pass the movie ID, and all the theaters in which a particular movie ID is present is getting listed, right? Is getting listed. So maybe we can try to do something based on these two terms only. Maybe we can try to form a API regarding this. So let's just see. So first of all, this time I'm going to go to the routes, and what I'm going to do is we'll say app.get, and we'll put the URL /mba/API/v1, and we can say theaters/theater ID, right? That is for a corresponding theater we want to get whether a particular movie is running or not. And in the controller we can say dot check movie, right? It is going to check whether a movie is running in a theater or not. So now what we can do is we can take this function check movie and start implementing the controller. So we'll write a function. Let's do something like const check movie. We are going to have the HTTP request object, response object, right? This can be the case. And let's see, we are going to get theater and movie ID, right? So what we can do in the service function, we can pass both of them. So we can bind it inside a bunch of try catch. We can say error response body dot error is equals to L. And then we can say return rest.status 500.json error response body, right? So We are going to set the error in the error response body's error key, and then we are going to return this JSON with the status code of 500. This is something very easy. Otherwise, what we are going to do, we are going to do const response. We'll await for the service call. Theater service dot let's write a name of function. So we can say check movie in a theater. Right, check movie in a theater. We are going to pass theater ID and right, theater ID and movie ID. And at last, what we are going to do, we are going to say success response code dot error is equal, dot data is equals to JSON. Is equals to response. And then we can say success response body, this should also be body, dot message successfully checked if movie is present in the theater. Right. So this is easy, and we can just export this function check movie. So this function is done, and we can do one more thing. Let's go to service and write this function check movie in a theater. Right, check movie in a theater. This is going to be an asynchronous function, and you're going to have theater ID, right, and movie ID, and we are going to expect it to be working like a function. Okay, and let's see. Oh, sorry, this should be const. Okay, cool. Now we will bind this inside a bunch of try catch as well. We can do console.log error, and then we'll do throw error. Right, and let's do one thing. Let response is equals to. Now what we have to do is we have to actually make a query. Now how or what type of query we are going to do? So what we can do is we can get a particular theater, right? So how can we get it? We can say await theater dot find, right? In the find query, just like this, you can see here this one. In the find query, we can pass a query object. In this query object, the ID should be theater ID. Okay, and then, and technically we don't even need to do find, we can just do find by ID. And then we can say return response dot movies dot let's see, let's do index of movie ID. Okay, let's see if we have a function. So index of JS, right? Let's see what index of does. It will return -1 if the value is not present, right? So what we can do, this should not be equal to -1, right? That means movie is present in a theater if the answer is not -1. So we have exported check movie in a theater as well, right? If due to any case we are not able to find a theater, if not theater, then we'll return other error code. No such theater found for the given ID, right? And the code is going to be 44. And what you can do is this should be response in the controller. We'll say if response dot error, right? Then we can say error response body dot error is equals to response dot error, right? So error response body dot error is equals to response dot error, and then what we can do is we can say return res dot status. We can say response dot status dot json error response body, and that's it, I guess. So we are able to successfully find most of the things. Let's see if things are working fine or not. So let's go to the database. This is the movie ID. Let's get the movie ID, and this is the hall ID. We have to check whether this particular hall is containing this particular movie or not. Okay, it says something went wrong. Okay, let's see. It throws internal server error. Let's see if we can debug. So in the theater routes, MB API v1 theaters slash movies. Okay, looks good. We're going to do check movie. Okay, this is not directly theater ID. This should be request dot params dot theater ID and request dot params dot, right? So we are going to take the theater ID and movie ID from the param. This was one use case that we had to handle. Okay, so looks like this request is getting halted. We are doing find one here. Okay, I believe from service we might not be returning something. Okay, one problem was we are not returning success, so we'll say return rest dot status 200 dot json success response body, right? Okay, so okay, it says successfully checked if the movie is present in the theater or not, and it says success true and data value is true. So we should just say movie is present, right? Otherwise we will just say if we change the movie ID, successfully checked if the movie is present in the theaters and data is false, that it is not present. So this is going to be simple, right? And we are able to successfully implement an API that will check whether the corresponding movie is present in the theater object or not. Let's just make a quick commit. Added API for checking if movie is running in theater or not. Then we say git push origin, and that's it. So we have successfully implemented this API. I hope you guys were able to get the whole logic for this. In this video, we are going to actually talk about authorization. We are going to understand the concept of authorization, right? So authorization, right? We are going to understand what is authorization. We will try to understand how is it different from authentication. All the nuances that are related to authorization we are going to discuss. What can be the applications of a concept like authorization, right? So let's just start without any delay. So first of all, let's just try to formally define authorization. So authorization is the process of allowing an authenticated user to access the resources by checking whether the user has access rights by granting or denying specific permissions to an authenticated user, right? So let's just try to understand this definition line by line, word by word, right? So we are saying that authorization is the process of allowing an authenticated user. So let's just stop right here. So if you see just this much part, then you will be able to directly correlate with the fact that authorization as a concept exists only for authenticated users, right? If a user has already completed authentication and is given access to our system, then only the concept and the whatever talk about authorization comes into the picture, right? So it's a process of allowing an authenticated user to access the resources by checking whether the user has access rights by granting or denying specific permission to an authenticated user. So again, let's try to read this much part, that for an authenticated user to access the resources by checking whether the user has access rights. So it is a process that is done for authenticated users, right? Which who are trying to access some resources from our application. We know that we are making resource intensive applications, right? So these users are going to try to access the resources of our application. Now, what authorization refers to is it is a process of checking that whether these authenticated users have the corresponding access rights or not. What do you mean by access rights? Access right means, are they given allowed to access the corresponding resource or not? Let's say they're trying to access a resource. Is the corresponding user even allowed to access it or not? Right. So it's a process of checking the allowance, right? That okay, the user was already authenticated, but just being authenticated doesn't help. Is the user even allowed to do something specific? For example, in apps like Amazon or Flipkart, right? We as a user just go and buy the products. That's kind of like simple. But in order to sell a product, you need to register yourself as a seller. It is not going to be sufficient to just register yourself as a normal user and then even try to sell objects on platforms like Amazon and Flipkart. And why is that? Because when you try to sell something from these platforms, they generally try to target some commission from you and everything. So they need to have a proper mechanism set up for you, right? They need to do all the billings, they need to check everything so that whatever you sell is sold in a proper manner. So Now, if you are a normal user, you don't have the access rights to sell something. You are authenticated as well. A seller is also authenticated, but you don't have access to sell anything, right? In order to sell anything, you need to specifically ask for a special privilege of becoming a seller. So that's what is written in the next part, that whether the user has access rights or not by granting or denying specific permissions to an authenticated user, right? So what do? We try to grant or deny some specific permissions to an authenticated user. Let's say if the user is trying to access a resource and they are not allowed to do so, then we can grant them access to it. So we can grant them special permission so that they are able to access that resource, or maybe we can deny their access to that resource. This whole process is authorization. So in a nutshell, authorization means what a user can do, right? On a platform, what a particular user is allowed to do. That is authorization. So if you talk more about it, we can say that authorization, on the other hand, authorization on the other hand occurs after your identity is successfully authenticated to the system, right? So the concept of authorization, as I already told you, this concept occurs if and only if the identity that you are having, that identity is specifically authenticated to the system. There you are verified to access the system. Right? This verification, authentication you are done, then the concept of authorization comes into the picture, which ultimately gives you full permission full permission to access the resources such as information, files, databases, funds, locations, and almost anything, right? So based on your authorized role, you will be given permission to access the resources such as like whatever information we are having on our server, whatever files we have stored, whatever data is there in the databases, right? And much more. So all of these things, the access to all of these things will be granted or maybe denied for different users, right? In simple terms, in simple terms, authorization determines your ability to access the system and up to what extent. So authorization is going to like figure out is going to be the mechanism that is going to help you to figure out your ability to access the system, right? And what all things you can access in the system, what up to what extent you can access things in the system, what are the things allowed specifically to you. All of this comes under authorization. Once your identity is verified by the system after authentication, you are then authorized to access resource of the system, right? So once you have done the successful authentication, based on your authorized rights, you will be able to access the resource of the system, right? So after that, once you have authorized, once you authenticate, we can say that once you authenticate, you are then granted authorization or permission to perform certain allowed tasks, right? Once you are done with authentication, then only you are granted the authorization or whatever permissions you need in order to do the task. This means that the process of granting or revoking or denying anything, that thing also occurs after your authentication, right? You have to request for the authorization access. In most cases, an administrator of the system provides permission through use of controls. So generally what happens is, this task of giving access to someone, revoking access from someone and everything, this is done by generally a system administrator, right? They have the right to provide access to someone, right? For example, when we try to authenticate, when we try to authenticate to our bank website, then successful authentication will not successful authentication will not give you the ability to look into other customers account, right? Or withdraw money that is not your own, and withdraw money that is not your own, right? So this is what I'm trying to say, that when you log into a bank website, you cannot like just go to any user's account and see their details or withdraw their money. Similar thing happens with like social media websites. You can only see your chat messages, you cannot see everyone's chat messages, although there must be some specific APIs that will be able to fetch those chat messages for those users. But as a user of your account, you will be only given access to see your chat, right? So authentication does not gives you keys to the castle. That means you cannot do everything in the app just by authenticating yourself. You should be properly authorized to do that thing as well, right? So this is what is the definition of authorization, right? That means you will be given permissions to access something, your permissions can be later revoked, you may be denied to access something, and all of those things, even if you're already authenticated, because not every user will be allowed to do everything on the application. So I hope you are able to understand the basic logic around authorization after authentication as well. Summarize whatever we discussed around authentication and authorization till now. We can just write a quick short summary. So we can say that, to summarize, authentication grants you authentication grants you consideration of sorts. Consideration of sorts if you can't authenticate successfully, you are no longer going to be considered. You are no longer going to be considered, right? So we mean that by saying you are no longer going to be considered, that if you're not able to authenticate yourself, then you are not going to use any feature of the app. Like almost all of the features are not going to be useful for you. So it's kind of like is a first line of defense for the application, right? The conversation between you and the application you want to access will be very short, will be very short, right? Resulting in denied access. So because you won't be able to use most of the features, you're going to be denied access from both most of them, and things are not going to work for you, right? Whereas authorization, however, gives you the actual ability gives you the actual ability to perform allowed functions, once you authenticate, right? For example, a bank customer a bank customer representative logged on as a bank employee logged on as a bank employee can access many accounts, and perform additional features, right? So like sometimes like employees have got better privileges in terms of accessing the database files information in the app. So that's why we are taking an example like this, that a bank customer representative who is like a bank employee, if they try to if they want, they can access many accounts and perform some additional features on those accounts, right? but they won't be given access to withdraw money for anyone. To withdraw money for anyone. This is going to be really important. So if we try to list down some differences between authentication and authorization, so we can write something like this. So let's say authentication and authorization, right? So for authentication, the first point we can write is authentication confirms your identity to grant access to the system, right? Whereas authorization determines whether you are authorized to access the resources or not, right? Then for authentication, you can say that it is the process of validating user credentials to gain access. Whereas for authorization we can write it is the process of verifying whether access is allowed or not, right? Then if we want to list down some more differences, we can say that for authorization it determines, this is for authentication, that it determines whether the user is what they claim to be, that is the user and email that they are trying to access, whether they are already there, like the same user with that credentials or not, because if there are someone else, then they might not be able to authenticate because they won't be having the correct credentials. Then for authorization we can say that it determines what user can and cannot access, right? So it is going to majorly define the roles, that what the user can do on the app or what they cannot do on the app. Then we can say that authentication, specifically for if we talk about authentication, then authentication usually requires a username and a password and a password. Whereas if we talk about authorization, then authentication factors required for authorization may vary depending on security, right? Quite simple and straightforward. Then for authentication we can say authentication is the first step of authorization. So always comes first. Then authorization is done after successful authentication, right? So this is going to be something, right, that authentication is going to occur always before authorization, because it's kind of like the first line of defense. Once you have authenticated yourself, then only you will be able to check whether the user is authorized for a particular thing or not. So if you talk about a particular example, let's try to wrap it by a particular example. So you can say, for example, students of a particular university are required to authenticate themselves before accessing the student link of the university's official web app. Right, this is with respect to authentication. And if we talk about authorization, like for authentication, we said that, let's say if you are a student of a particular university, then you are always expected to authenticate yourself before you can access any student link or student resource. Whereas authorization determines exactly what info the students are authorized to access on the university website after successful authentication, right? So once the user or the student has like logged into the university app, then what all different things they can do is going to be determined by authorization. So these are like some core major differences between authentication and authorization, and I hope you guys are able to understand them as well. In the further upcoming set of parts, what we are going to do, we are going to start looking at the implementations of all of these. In the previous set of parts, we have already discussed the basics of authentication and authorization. In this part, we are going to discuss about types of authentication. So we have to talk about types of authentication, right? So there can be multiple ways in which you can authenticate the user, right? Let's just write about it. You can say that authentication represents user, or I would say recognized user, right? This is the whole purpose of authentication, right? That a user who is already registered on your application is able to now start getting access to the application, right? Now there are different ways in which you can perform authentication. The first can be your traditional password based, right? So you can say that this is the most common way of authentication. You can see, like, I'm not having a correct, or I would say a valid statistic, but if you will say every now or then, like in 10 apps, if you will see at least 5 or 7 odd apps will be definitely having a password based authentication, right? So what password based authentication is, in this type of authentication you expect your user, so we expect our user to put a valid registered username slash email and a a correct password corresponding to it, corresponding to it, right? This is going to be the expectation, that your user is going to come on the app and they are going to like put their email ID, they are going to put their password, and then they are going to authenticate themselves, right? So users can use combination of letters, numbers and symbols to create a strong password, right? To create a strong password. This is like one type of authentication. Then another way can be a multi-factor authentication. What is a multi-factor authentication? Some like nowadays in apps like Gmail, Facebook and all, you can see that you have an option to put your email ID, you have an option to put your password. But apart from your email ID and password, once you put them and that is correct, they prompt you with for asking for some more information. For example, um, they can ask you for your security questions or recovery ID, multiple things around it, right? There can be some captcha test, facial recognition. Like in a lot of bank mobile apps, there is dedicated facial recognition. So it is kind of like a multi-factor authentication. What is multi-factor authentication? Here we use two or more ways to authenticate users single time. So in a single iteration, you use two or more ways to authenticate. It can be captcha test. Captcha test is generally done for considering the fact that the any bot is not trying to access your app. So that's why we put captcha. Facial recognition and so on. Right. So there can be this multi-factor type of authentication. Right. Sometimes you put your phone number and then you get an OTP even after putting email ID password. That's also there. But we generally consider this as a separate one also. That is OTP based authentication. Right. Here we don't use a pre-saved password. Instead, we use email slash number to get a unique code as one-time password. This OTP changes for every iteration, right? This OTP is going to change for every iteration. So you don't have a like a saved password or something. You don't have to get a headache of saving a password or something. Instead, what you can do is you can get your email ID or your phone number registered, and based on that you can get an OTP. Generally this OTP based authentication is like very frequent, and sometimes it is also clubbed with multi-factor authentication, right? So what you do is you put your email ID and put your number, like any one of these, and then on that number or email ID you get a unique OTP that is valid for some time. Then you have to put that OTP on the platform, and then you are able to authenticate. So this is one more way. We can say we can have one more way as third party. So this involves a third party that completes the process of authentication and does not have any credentials from the user side for, right? So the thing is, instead of building the whole infrastructure where you are able to authenticate a user, right, get email, password, maybe OTP or something else, what we do, we try to get a third party service that already has got a full-fledged solution for authentication, and we use them also, or maybe just them, to get our users authenticated for the app, and generally it doesn't require a dedicated credential, right? For example, FB login, Google login. So in FB login and Google login, what happens is you integrate the SDKs and APIs from Facebook and Google, and your app doesn't have to handle authentication at any point of time. Facebook and Google has written dedicated APIs. You're going to call those APIs, and those APIs are going to handle authentication for you. All you have to do is just put a button that sign up via Facebook, sign up with Google. The moment they click on it, they will be redirected for a Facebook account login or a Gmail account login or a Google account login. If they have already logged in that account, then they will directly get signed in. Otherwise, they have to log in there. So whatever login infrastructure or authentication infrastructure they have built is going to happen on their application. Once they authenticate the user, they are going to give us a corresponding response based on which we can take a decision that whether we have to authenticate the user or not, right? So this can be the third party one. Apart from that, we can have a biometric authentication. Generally, biometric authentication requires, so this involves biological characteristics of a person like fingerprint, right? So using biological characteristic, we can do this. For example, in a lot of applications nowadays, in phone pay, Paytm, etc., which are like payment based apps, when you have to open the app in your mobile, then either you have to put a code or a login ID, or they prompt you option for just putting your fingerprint or maybe facial scanner, any one of these, and they directly take you inside the corresponding app. For example, let's say sometimes you even lock your applications. So in iOS and all, if you want to lock your WhatsApp, you can unlock it just with your biometric. You don't need to put your PIN or password. This is one more way. And then we have a dedicated way, like this is kind of like an algorithm or a mechanism to handle authentication, which is called as token based authentication. In token based authentication, the end user or the front end, or let's say the UI or the client, whatever you say, they receive a token from the backend after successful sign in, and this token is going to be used for signing in to the app, signing out from the app, using any resource and everything. We're going to discuss about this token based authentication in the further upcoming set of parts, very detailed and very in depth. So stay tuned till that. But I hope the basic different type of authentication that nowadays exist and that you can do is clear to everyone. Right. Part of our movie booking series, we are going to discuss about token based authentication. Token based authentication, right? So what is token based authentication? So what happens is, if you want to implement authentication from scratch, right, token based authentication is one of the most useful ways to do so. So technically what we do is, in order to implement token based authentication, we follow the following steps. So let's talk about the first step. So the first step is, the user who is already registered to the app tries to sign in. So generally, sign in and registration are two different processes. In the registration process, user actually first time introduces themselves to the system, right? That's registration. And then later on, whenever they have to access the system, they generally do sign in. So I believe this one part is clear to everyone. I'll later formally also define both of them, but I believe some idea you guys already have got. So the user who is already registered to the application tries to sign in to that. If the user gives correct credentials, then the server returns a special and unique token to the user, which is in our case is our client app, right? So what happens is, if the user gives correct details for the authentication, then the server returns a unique token to the user, right? It is the responsibility of the client. It is the responsibility of the client to store the token, right? So once the client has stored the token, then every time if a client wants to access a resource, which is every time client wants to access a resource, which is, I would say, protected by authentication layer, then in order to access the resource, the client must send this token along with the request, right? So technically what happens is, every time, now let's say you have some API that can be only accessed by a user who is authenticated to the app. Now, every time if a user wants to access that API, they have to send this token that was received when they logged in from with the server. They have to send this token with every request, right? Then for every request received for the protected API or protected resource, the server checks if the client has sent a token which is valid as well or not. If yes, then server grants access to the resource. Otherwise not. Right. So the thing is that for every request, whatever request the server receives, the server is going to check that for that corresponding request, whether the client that is sending the request has sent this token or not. If they have not sent this token, then definitely you won't be able to access it. Like the client won't be able to access it. If the client has sent this token, then the server first verifies this token. If the token is verified, then only the server grants access to the resource, or let's say processes the request. If the token is not valid, then the server is not going to grant the access or not going to process the request. This happens, right? Token has a certain expiry as well, so we have to renew it, right? So this token is not something like you got it generated once and it is going to stay there forever in your application. That is not how it actually works. Generally, these kind of tokens have got their own expiry time. Whatever time you are going to like put during the token generation, that particular time is going to be set. Once that expiry time is done, then what happens is this token is expires and you have to reissue a new token. This process goes on, and sometimes you might have seen that by using Facebook for like let's say 20 days, 30 days, I don't remember the exact date, but you get automatically logged out to the application. This happens because your token got expired. As simple as that, right? Okay, so this is the process of token based authentication. Now, what kind of tokens do we use? So we try to use generally we try to use JSON web token, right? Generally we try to use JSON web token, right? Let's talk about a bit around JSON web token, that like what JWT is. It's also called as JWT, right? It is also called as JWT, right? So JSON web token is a mechanism for user slash client authorization in most web apps today. So nowadays a lot of web apps are there, and like different type of apps are there that are using the same type of authentication using JSON web token, right? So it's kind of like a relevant technology nowadays. So let's talk more about JSON web token and like what it is, how it actually works, things like that, right? So it has a lot of features. That it is compact, right? It is secure because it is digitally signed by a private key. If you're not able to understand what is digital signature, private key, public key, I would recommend you guys to read few things around encryption. This might give you a clear picture, but you can say that in order to encrypt data, because this JSON web token is not like going to be a plain string, it's going to be an encrypted data. So in order to encrypt data, we need keys to encrypt it. There can be one key mechanism or two key mechanism. So something like that happens. Okay. So we can say, so these are digitally signed by a public key or a private key or a public key as well. So both type of keys are generally used, right? The purpose of JWT is not to hide data. First thing you have to keep this thing clear in mind is it is not to hide data. This is not the sole purpose of it, but to ensure authenticity of data. So data should not get ruptured, or like it should be authentic, just like how it was encrypted. It should be just like that, right? Okay. Using JSON web tokens makes the mechanism stateless, and server doesn't need to keep track of tokens assigned to users, right? So what happens is, it's not like that for every user you are like issuing a new token. So the server has to keep a track of the fact that which user is using which token. So the best part of JSON web token is you can generate these with JSON web token. So with some data you can create these. So what you generally do, you use users data, for example user ID or email, in order to generate these tokens. So already in this token, when you will decrypt the token, you will get the same data back, that is user ID or email, whatever you use. So in the token only we are saving the information of the user. So we don't need to save that in the on the server. Whenever the user is going to send the JSON web token, we can decrypt it and check the credentials with the users, right? This is going to be something very important. So generally, uh, if you talk about a JSON web token, so structure of a JSON web token looks like this. So if you talk about a complete token, so there are three major components of the token: header, payload, and signature, right? These are the three major main components of a JSON web token, right? If you talk about payload, then payload is the actual data to be stored. Actual data to be stored. If you talk about the JWT header, right? So you can say that header contains the type of token and algorithm to sign the payload, right? So it actually contains technically the metadata, that what type of token you are using, to its JWT token, what algorithm you have used in order to sign the payload. Sign the payload means encrypt the payload, right? This is something that is stored here in the header. And the third component is the signature. So you can see server uses the signature to verify whether the payload has been tempered or not, right? So what happens is, this signature is a unique value. If at any point of time something happens with the JW token, then this signature changes. So you are able to detect that whether it is hampered or not. So it's kind of like an overall structure of JWT token. You don't need to go in the very much in-depth details around what algorithms are used for JWT token, how can you write your own algorithm, things like that. That is not going to help us a lot, because JWT token as a mechanism is a already established thing, and we have a lot of solutions that can help us to already build a JWT token. For example, if you go for Node, if you go for Node, then there is a library JSON web token, web token, npm JSON web token. So you can see there is a library JSON web token, right? This library will all you have to do is just install this library, and all it will directly do is it will help you to just encrypt some data to generate a JWT token, and then also will help you to decrypt that JWT token to extract out the data. And once you have this token, you just have to send this token to the client. The client will be sending this token every time in the request, and things will happen, right? You will be able to authenticate. So this is a very useful package. All you have to do is just to npm install JSON web token, and you can use this function jwt.sign. JWT is the JSON web token object, the library object, and you can use the function .sign. You can pass the message data. You have to pass a secret or private key, right? And these are some extra options. So if you see for an example, you can see jwt.sign, then the payload is an object, and this is the key that they are passing, and they will get a token, right? So this is as simple as that for generating a token, right? So you can see you can pass some extra parameters like expiry and all these things you can pass. And then if you want to verify whether the token is valid token or not, you can just verify this token by using this. So dot verify is a function. So what you can do, you can verify this token, right? So you can just pass the token and pass the same private key, and you can just check that what is the result, whether it is verified or not, right? You can see. So if you will put a wrong secret or a wrong token, it will not get verified. So things like these are very I would say simple. Like if you want to just generate a token, just use the function sign. If you just want to verify the token, you can just use the function verify. It's as simple as that. So we're going to see the implementation of JSON web token in the next set of parts. But first of all, we have to understand that, okay, when we are generating, we know that how can we generate it on the backend. But like when the user is going to send it, how they are going to send it, like are they going to send it in URL params, will they be sending this in query params or request body or headers? There are multiple places in which you can send the data, how you want to send it. That is something that we are going to discuss in the next parts. We'll try to set up a flow where we will be able to understand how we are getting the data on the backend. We will also verify this package in the next set of parts, and we will start the implementation of our authentication and authorization as well as soon as possible. So I hope the overall logic of JSON web token and token based authentication is clear to everyone. In this part, we are going to actually start setting up our user model, right? We have already seen what is authentication, what is authorization, and how both of the things work hand in hand, right? But in order to like set up the whole authentication, authorization, everything works around user, right? We need to first of all define how the user is going to look like. We have to first of all define the model of a user, so that, or we can say in terms of mongoose, the schema of the user, so that we are able to see concretely what are the properties that a user need in order to register, in order to authenticate, authorize, and everything. In this particular part, we are going to solely focus on the user model schema. We are going to figure out the properties, and for the corresponding properties, what can be the validations we need and everything. So without any further delay, let's just start the discussion. So we need to figure out how the schema of the user model looks like, right? We have to define the schema. So for the user model, right, for the user model, we need the corresponding properties. There should be at least a unique ID, unique identifier for every user document, because we know, right, the model that we are going to create is going to be in the form of a collection. Inside a collection, we do have a lot of documents, right? So for each document, or let's say for each user entry, we need to have a unique ID. That is going to be something very important, right? Okay. Now, apart from this, let's have few more properties. So we need to have an email ID, a unique, valid email ID of a user, right? Then we need to have a password, which should be a strong password for the account, right? We should have two properties, that is created at and updated at. I believe everybody already knows about these, right? We don't even need to like manually put them. Mongoose do it for us. Apart from that, apart from these three properties, we can have something like user type. This user type is actually going to show role of the user. That is whether the user is a normal user, right? Or it is or they are having a special role, for example, admin, client, or something. This user type is going to be very important, right? We'll be writing dedicated API so that someone can request to upgrade, like update their account from a normal customer to let's say a client, something like that. And then we need to have something like user status. So let's say whenever somebody will raise a request to become a client or something, their status will be either pending or approved. Depending on our admins, they will be approving the status, or let's say for some clients now we don't want to list their movie halls and movies on our platform, so maybe we can have a status deprecated, something like that. So this user status is going to help us there, right? Okay. So these will be the properties that we are going to have in order to prepare the user schema, right? Now all we have to do is, for each property we are going to like overall we will prepare a user schema. There we'll put each property, and based on the definition of the property, we are going to put validations on it, right? These validations can be something like to validate whether the user is giving a correct email or not, validation whether the user is giving a correct, like a strong password or not. Like it should not be like the user is giving you one character password or a two character password. So maybe some validations around that. So these kind of things we can try to validate and see how the user can build.